Good morning, folks. And you see, I have an extra person here with me. I'm on uncle duties today.
Oh, nice.
All right. Got it. All right. Good morning, folks. Appreciate everybody joining in. We'll kick off this morning. With our agenda. First, we have a discussion on creation of 10-year plan to create and preserve affordable housing. We can start there.
Derwin, if I could interrupt for just a moment, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Paul will need to leave at 11. And so I'm wondering if maybe we should take the action items first in the event anybody else might need to leave and we lose our quorum.
That works for me. If there's no objection to that, that makes sense.
Okay.
So that goes down to then our action item then is the election of officers in terms of the vice chair position in terms of needing to take action on. And so, Kamala, do you want to?
Sure. So Paul has some obligations that'll make it difficult for him to step into that role. And so, of course, when we did the elections last time, it was contingent upon his acceptance in the vice chair role. So because of that inability to serve today, we need to bring this back so that we can select a vice chair.
So with that, as we open the floor for some conversation that, John, were you about to say something?
I was just going to say, Paul, that's exactly why I tried not to ever miss meetings, so people don't do that to me.
Yeah, well, that would be my goal too, but the last two were kind of unavoidable for me. Yes. That was a surprise when I saw that later on.
Yeah. Well, I guess the question is there anyone who would volunteer, or does somebody want to volunteer someone else?
This is George. I'd love what we're doing, but I just don't have the bandwidth right now. As you all probably know, we're looking for a CEO right now, and Clay and I are kind of splitting duties with a lot of stuff that's going on at Habitat right now. So just want to at least communicate that with the rest of the group.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's down to John and Ryan, since Donna's not here and Lisa's not here.
Well, so I've been, I'm kind of in the same boat. I mean, I have a lot of irons in the fire because I'm doing this exact same type of thing in Greensboro as well. I'd be willing to, but let me ask you this question. You know, the optics of it, considering that I, you know, the job that I have, my day job. I just want to make sure that that wouldn't be an issue either. You know, after the news from last night with the Supreme Court's action, you know, I worry a little bit about that, you know, for the group and how the community might view it. I mean, I'm willing to do it. I think that I think Ryan would be great. So I also don't want to jump in front of Ryan. And honestly, I think Ryan, and I'm being honest here, I think the optics are better for you to do it. I also think you're better qualified than me, but I think that's a consideration.
Oh, we can't hear you, Ryan. Uh-oh. We're not hearing you. Let's see. Oh, here comes Lisa.
Is that working now?
Yeah, very good.
I appreciate the kind words. You know, I wondered the same things that relates to, you know, being the banker on the panel or coalition. So that's one of the reasons I hadn't raised my hand. if the group feels like that's, the right path forward. My time is strapped like everybody else's, but I can try to make it work.
Okay. Yeah, I don't really think either of your positions should be any kind of conflict or what have you, because our role is to make recommendations to council. And we need to have all types of folks represented here on the committee. So I think either of you would be totally fine. So,
Yeah.
So Ryan, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I would say I agree 100%, and even more than that, your presence on the coalition is actually endowed in terms of the language, in terms of having folks representing these industry areas. So it's desired to have that. So serving in one of these capacities, I think just falls in line there. So yeah. So John and Ryan, y'all talk it out. Which
I nominate Ryan. I'll just I'll take the lead there.
All right. So is that a formal nomination?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
All right. Is there a second?
I second that.
I was going to say, somebody please unmute really quickly.
I second that.
I heard George, but I also read Paul's lips. So, yeah. So that's been moved and improperly second. So there is a nomination on the floor for Ryan to serve as vice chair of the coalition. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, without objection, we'll close the floor for nominations for vice chair. And without objection, my screen just went. And so we have single nomination on the floor for Ryan for vice chair. And all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed likewise.
For Paula.
All right, that sounded unanimous to me. All right, Ryan, we appreciate your willingness to serve, definitely, and again for everyone, brings a amazing amount of perspective from your different roles. But again, looking forward to how we move forward. In my opinion, this next phase of our work here is this is where we're moving into action, and so really excited about where we go from this moment. And so definitely appreciate everybody's work thus far in this process, and look forward to how we move things forward. Cool. Anything else we need to do on that front, Marla?
No, that's covered.
Okay, cool. All right. With that, then we'll step back to the discussion areas on the agenda, back to the top there in terms of the creation of 10-year plan to create and preserve housing. Marla?
Sure. So after our meeting, I did reach back out to Andronika Morris with Housing NOLA, and she was willing to come and spend some time with us in September to kind of help us get our arms around just how we get this plan activity jump started. So she is proposing Friday, September 17th. So that's actually a week earlier than our normal meeting times. And so first of all, I wanted to confirm that that is a time that works for everybody. Before we do anything like air tickets or anything like that. And then we can talk about the rest. But just first to just check in and make sure that September 17th is a doable day. And I think we were talking about, I know we usually are scheduled for 2 hours, maybe stretching it from 3, possibly to 4, and still maybe have it pivot around the lunch hour so as not to have so much time away from your daily responsibilities.
And so how does that look for folks on the 17th?
Derwin, Marla, I'm showing I have a all staff meeting that morning from 8:30 to 10:30. So I would be able to join, but if we start our normal 10 o'clock time or whatever, I'd have to join a little later.
And I think we have the flexibility to adjust the time as we need, since it's going to be a little different from our usual work session, but we can still make sure we get it publicized, for folks to tune in if they desire.
Yeah, and I know that's one of the things we mentioned when we were looking at the other date that, if we needed to shift time earlier or later, folks seem to be open to that. But I guess maybe generally speaking, if folks' availability, and then if we need to scale it back some, we can then look at where we need to reset timing.
Okay.
That date is tentatively okay with me. The only caveat is just I don't know exactly yet what my wife's schedule is in terms of her medical treatment. So that could change that. But as of now, I'm okay on the 17th.
Okay.
Good for me too.
Okay.
I'm good too.
All right. Thanks, Lisa.
Okay.
right.
We don't have any objection. Paul, not Paul. Is it? Well, I was looking at Paula's thing there, but Marla, is there just for that time for the timing? Could we, I guess, maybe just circle? You said 10:30, George. First, I was thinking maybe we send something out to folks in terms of just kind of pull them on time and start, but maybe we just handle it here in terms of. You said her flexibility is pretty good, so maybe if we did 11, does that seem to work better if we did a start time at 11 rather than 10 on that date? Seem to be sufficient for folks.
That will work better for me. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So let's plan for 11 on the 17th then.
Okay. And I'll research locations in the event we can get together in person and just be able to spread out well. Because I just think it'll be more advantageous for us to be in the same room if we can do it. So I'll research some options there.
And I'd offer, Paula, and again, just if you don't have a city facility, I'd offer in terms of just the church facilities could be potentially available for that. We have monitors and things. We need to put stuff up on screens as well.
Great.
Spread out.
Great.
And of course, we can always use Habitat.
Oh yeah, that's right too. Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay, so I have it down for September 17th at 11. Location to be determined. Okay, and of course you see that I had noted, if we wanted to talk some today about our goals or desired outcomes, what might that look like? And then, of course, one of the other things that I know we'll need to talk about, and Ms. Morris will be able to share her experiences around what are the resources needed to actually do this work, both from a human capital perspective as well as financial. And then even figuring out what other resources might be needed that might not readily come to mind. So I know those are some of the things that we will be talking about when she comes. I think my question is, are there just kind of off the cuff some goals or desired outcomes that you'd like me to make a note of and share with her so that she can kind of come prepared to talk about some of those?
Yeah. Go ahead, George.
The only one question I had initially, and I would say, if this has already been discussed and I've just missed it, let me know. But I think before we get together with somebody, one question I would just like for us to answer is, what do we as a coalition, what is affordable housing? What is affordable? Because I know it's a few different definitions around there. If we want to go off HUD, 30% of the income, but as a coalition, do we have a set guideline that we have decided on that this is what we consider affordable housing?
Okay. I know from the city staff perspective, we use the HUD definition, which is 80 and below.
Oh, you mean AMI? Okay, then.
Mhm.
Okay. But I just wanted to make sure that's what we were saying we were going to do, because I know in a few other, I'm sure we're all in different housing committees and groups all across the city. That has been a question that has been thrown around a lot. Because if you have affordable to me and to someone else may be two totally different things. So I just wanted to make sure that as we roll it out to the city, everybody can agree that, you know, this is something that if we're fighting for people for affordable housing, we can agree on that. So, all right.
And maybe that's a point of, I think it's a really, really good point, George, in the sense of being able to early on define in that piece, because I think in that public conversation needs to be clear. But one of the things I've heard from folks to that end is that although the majority of the deficit we have in community is for that 80% and below, you still have people who are earning more than that 80%, but they're spending more than 30% of their income on their housing. So they still have that negative impact and are not technically in affordable housing units. So it's what I've read somewhere, a different kind of way folks have framed it, and essentially putting it that way. Anybody who, you know, creating an environment or a community where individuals are not paying more than 30% of their income to achieve their housing. That's really broad in the sense of, and it doesn't have a bunch of definitive pieces on it. But I think it does capture different components, but I think that's something worth us having as a part of that dialogue early in, to try to set and frame very clearly where we are in that piece of work. But I think there's different actions that go, I think, based upon whether you're talking about people 80 above and then 80 and below. So, yeah.
I think that piece, as it relates to how much folks are spending, is certainly important. And maybe I think the way that we've seen it, or I've seen it defined in other areas, is, you know, 80 and below, to that 30% ratio is affordable housing in the sense that most people refer to it. And then you've got affordable workforce housing that's that kind of 80 to 120 AMI range, specifically targeting that same ratio that you're talking about, Daryl. And that's how I've seen it kind of broken up or distinguished. But what we probably want to decide is not just how we talk about it, but what our focus wants to be once we define those things. So there may be a gap there, but if we've got limited resources, where do we want to spend most of our time?
Yeah, I think, and Derwin, that's an important point, because rents are rising way faster than incomes, and so is the for sale side as well. So you know, the AMI, the trick with that is that if it's not pegged to the inflation on the housing side or on the product side, then the AMI is almost, it's not that it's irrelevant, but it's not as good an indicator. If you don't put it in the perspective of local rents. And our rents, I mean, unfortunately, the rents in the triad are among the fastest rising in the country. So, you know, that's going to be an issue moving forward. And it's directly, we all know why. I mean, it's directly related to the lack of supply. So, you know, I think George raises a great question, because if we go strictly with AMI, we could be really, really precluding a lot of people that will need help in the near future. Because no one's going to build a home that without help. They're not going to build a home even below the 200,000 range. You know, it's not happening. They're building them at 250 right now. So there needs to be some. I think it's a good point of discussion. I think the AMI is a good starting point, but I do think we need to make it relative to rent and the cost of the housing.
And John, and maybe even Lisa, I guess the question I'd have there would be in the sense of because one of the things I've heard in conversation with folks is that, well, because we don't have the sufficient housing on that 80 and below spaces, that you have some of those folks taking it and are in those higher end units or paying more in those units. So if you're able to create that additional supply on the lower end, you help create space in some of the other areas of it. And so I guess it goes back to that point of kind of the focus area. So if we focus on this area, does it actually alleviate some of the pressure on some of the other points that, you know, by taking that action, you are actually impacting some of the other areas of it. But I guess that comes back to, again, that priority question for us.
Yeah. I think it's just a matter of how much. So again, it's how much of that 80 and below are you going to be able to create in a short term, and what's that ripple effect for that 80 to 120? I mean, I think to Ryan's point, that 120 is an important number, because that is definitely workforce housing. 120 is, you're not getting into the upper income areas. It's still, that is workforce level housing. And I think we can address both of them, but we just have to be careful, because we're seeing with the emergency rental program, there are plenty of people who need help who don't qualify because their AMI was just a little too high. They just didn't quite make the cut, and so we know that those folks are out there. I think in terms of priority, yes, we go for the 80 and below, but I think it would quickly move into the 80 to 120 level pretty quickly.
I've got
I'm sorry.
I've got another thing to toss out, Marla, if you're looking for feedback to give to Andronica before she comes. Assuming that our process is not only going to involve the work of a consultant doing some technical work, the work of staff, the work of the coalition, it's also going to involve dialogue with the community. I guess what might be helpful to hear from her is, what kind of information would it be helpful to have up front to kind of help generate meaningful dialogue with the community? So would it be helpful to have certain pieces of information out there to share with people as we're asking for input in terms of what they believe the needs are and things like that?
I think that just goes back to what we were just talking about. Good question, because that's the first thing that I always hear. People who live at, what is it? Is it 757 North? I can't remember downtown. With the way that is, some people paid $1,400, some people pay $500. I mean, so it all depends on what it is. So a lot of the people we'll be talking to, of course, they're going to be all over the spectrum. Because, you have some people who are in subsidized housing, some people are paying full price. So I just think if we can try and anticipate some of those questions, it'll kind of help us when we do talk to the public. So good idea.
Marla, I'm curious about what might happen, or if the city has some programs already that would help if we're building housing, for instance, in areas that we haven't seen much development and where we probably can't get great appraisals. So if housing is coming in, building at 200 and some thousand, then how do we cover the gaps from the appraised value and what, I mean, does the city have any soft second mortgage programs? I know they have had them, but how will we address that gap?
Certainly, we still have our basic programs where home buyers that might come to us through the CDCs for the product that they're developing, we provide that money to the home buyer. And then certainly, in some instances, we've provided the land to help write down the cost to make it more affordable. So, so we have our standard federally funded programs for that. I know one of the questions is, what other sources might we be able to assemble to help close those gaps? And I know that's something that we've talked about just kind of generally in terms of whether there might be another bond issuance to help raise some additional monies and things of that nature. So I do believe that one part of the work that'll take place as we really embark upon this plan creation is a conversation around how do we fund it. I think that's a critical piece. It's just how is this work going to be funded? because we don't have enough with our federal allocations. And with the 2018 bond money, we don't have enough left to close any significant gaps. So how do we actually develop the number of houses that the Housing Study and Needs Assessment says we're short of? That conversation has to involve financing. So I don't have a full answer for today, but I think that should be one of the deliverables that come out of the process of creating the plan, is an analysis of how we can stack the dollars.
And to that, and I had two thoughts to relate to her as well. One was around financial resources, the question there. For me, and it's been something I've been talking about for a while, and I think we just figuring out how the communities use it, but I've seen it in other places. The use of private activity bonds for the construction and development of affordable housing. We don't use that very often here. I can only remember 2 times in the last probably 10 years that has been used as a method, but in other communities they use it more often. I just would wonder her thoughts on that, and whether or not that's another effective way that we could use, and how we talk that and resource that. The other is just some of the organizational things. And John, you may have more info on this, because I think that Greensboro's approaching their work a little bit different there in terms of working of kind of really that holistic picture. And I know we talk about, some coalition of folks pulling together, but I think they're engaging their CLC folks as well as others, just to really looking at the spectrum of housing from homelessness all the way up to, home ownership kind of thing. And just for us in our community, how those pieces may connect for us. Because I know that in that space, there's also conversations just like this happening in the same space. And so ensuring that we're not segmenting those conversations as we move forward here.
Yeah, they did when they brought in their consultant, they did a whole series of what we're talking about here, stakeholder meetings and public meetings, and they were hosted, like we hosted my office hosted the stakeholder meeting for the housing provider side, and they included the COC, and the recommendation reflected a lot of that. So for instance, this is fresh on my mind just because they were rolling theirs out right as COVID hit. So they added a COVID component to their plan. And that literally included, they went so far as to include things like what we're working on the other group that Marla and I sent in on, where they promoted legal aid, setting up a legal aid office for eviction, diversion, that kind of thing. So they went that far. It really did include the entire spectrum. I think I have the report. I don't know, Marla, I don't know if I ever shared it, but I can, their consultant's report, I'm happy to share it. So you have it. Yeah.
That'd be great to see.
Okay. I'll see if I can find it while we're chatting. And if I do, I'll put the link in the chat.
Okay. Very good. All right. Other thoughts around goals and outcomes? In terms of the private activity bonds, my thinking is nothing's off the table. How many different tools do we have? There are programs with State Housing Finance Agency. How do we better deploy some of those? But I think in this moment, there shouldn't be anything that's off the table when we start to look at resources that we need.
I'll just add to that there was a change at the end of the year in one of the stimulus bills that made those deals work a little bit better, but there's still usually a need for some gap financing. And that's really what you're seeing some of these other communities like Charlotte and Raleigh bringing to the table to fill in that gap between the equity and the senior debt from the private activity bond.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And Ryan, to that, and one of the things that I saw on that is like they kind of layer. You have the private activities bonds, then they also are able to do like the 4% piece, and then pulling in like that other private dollars or like public support to help fill those gaps. So again, it's layered. It's a lot of layering of those pieces to get to the end goal.
Right, and the change was that the 4% formula creates more equity now. It's not enough to fill that gap. And usually what you're seeing is like housing trust fund dollars or these private funds that have been raised in some of these communities filling that gap that you're talking about.
Yeah.
John, thanks for the link. Just opened it up.
Okay.
All right.
Other recommendation thoughts to frame that our time on the 17th? And if you don't have now, is there a time frame you want to, maybe if folks have other thoughts they want to maybe send you, Marla, then that they could in terms of by a certain date?
Sure. Yeah. If you have ideas, maybe send them to me by the 10th of September, and I can then just push them on over, and that'll give her just about a week to kind of get her mind wrapped around them.
Okay. All right.
And Derwin, I guess the only other thing I would add, if, and thinking of the Greensboro process reminded me of, just made me think of this. If it makes sense to invite stakeholders to not just, do a general community ask, but if we each have a constituency that we, if we want to have a certain number of developers there, I can try to recruit them to be at the meeting if that would be helpful. So maybe that is one thought, is trying to come up with a target list of folks that we think would be important to be there at that kickoff. It may be too early for that, but that might be something that we could do.
If I could interject, my thinking was when she comes, it's really just to kind of help give us some framework on how to engage in a process, but the actual work must have broad community involvement. But I was just looking at her to kind of help us figure out where to put our first step, right?
Okay.
And then, how do we go about identifying? So if you recall, they had 3 major working groups, one around data, another around community engagement, and I can't remember the third one now that I'm trying to say it. From my perspective, I thought we might need more than those kind of groups or a different configuration. So I think maybe starting off, just kind of what makes sense for us to look at in terms of getting information, getting involvement, and then part of the actual execution of this work involves that public piece.
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those crazy developers, you get them in a room before you know what you want.
Yeah, if you don't know what you want, you may come out with something different.
Yeah, exactly. You need to be real sure what you want before getting in the room with that group. Take it from a girl that knows.
Very, very good point, Lisa. Very good point.
Okay. Do you all, by chance, just have any idea how soon you'd want to start a formal process? I know we're going to kind of have this workshop and kind of suss out some ideas around structure and, the bigger 50,000 foot kind of stuff, just as a framework. But any thoughts about how soon you'd like to kick things off after her visit?
I do.
That might tell us how much homework we have.
I do think we need to have our staffing and consulting in place, so we have those resources. And again, I get back to, if we start the dialogue, I think we all need to start hopefully with the same information base. So we've got we need to have some things pulled together in terms of that goes, and kind of define the parameters of where we're going with different types of affordable housing. Some of the work we've done before in outlining the scope of what we're talking about doing, that can be folded in. But I do think we've got to have the staffing and consulting resources on board as we start that.
Okay.
I agree, and I think so. I guess whatever that timing is to help facilitate it, but it, sooner than later is that in terms of hoping to be able to get it. And I don't know, and I guess this goes to the how those conversations happen and the when and the how, but I guess out of this conversation that we'll have on the 17th of framing that work for it on when we move forward, one thing that I don't want, and it's just my perspective, and I don't know how we do it, is when we go to the public in that conversation, it shouldn't feel like starting out at zero. That's just my thought on, like, because there's been so much things that have happened. I'm just, how do we frame that outward to the public to get public input on what we're doing and how we're moving forward. You know, folks have a lot of fatigue, in my opinion, to a bunch of different meetings and doing this and talking about different issue areas without actually seeing a lot of movement in those areas. And so being able to actually show folks what has happened with the stuff you've already participated in and how this is a part of that, how there's connection to that, so that folks don't feel like, you know, this is just you're starting off at zero conversation, but we're getting your input on what you've already engaged on, and we want to continue to have that dialogue in that process. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Certainly, as I was thinking, when you were speaking, you know, I'm imagining that one of the things any consultant would need to do is go through our major documents: housing study and needs assessment, the vacant, abandoned, and deteriorated properties study, and now the For Everyone Home policy recommendations and so forth. Because I think that'll give a good backdrop, and maybe have as part of that, them putting together some kind of piece, be it a spreadsheet or document with, you know, narrative that talks about the work of each of those and how they line up and kind of help pave the way. Because a lot of this background work, you know, we've been fortunate to have that. And I know to some extent, New Orleans had the benefit of a number of different studies that had been undertaken right after Katrina. And so, you know, that was one source of data, but then, you know, there was others that they needed to access. So I do think we have a lot of information that once kind of distilled into, you know, a one pager or two or three, you know, we can demonstrate that we're not just starting at zero. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. As long as I just make sure that that's the framing, because I'm sure as others who've engaged with community in different fronts, you probably have heard, you know, as you go in and start having another conversation, is kind of, you start off with the, well, what's going to happen with my input? Is this actually gonna make a difference?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think the important thing of having the staffing and consulting on board is that when we have that initial public face input, I think people are going to have the expectation that things are going to move along. So it's going to have to move along faster than once a month coalition meetings for things to happen. So there will have to be kind of a ongoing effort that kind of really keeps going beyond that, so that people can see the results of what we're working on sooner rather than later. Yeah, so. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay. And I think this is probably another area where if you have thoughts and ideas that you want Andronika to also kind of meditate on before she comes, you know, definitely send them my way and I'll get those to her. Because I do think that the committees or work group kind of setup is going to be important to support the work, you know, so we can have folks just zero in on some specific areas of expertise and bring that back to the full group.
Yeah. So maybe that's a good segue, Marla, if folks don't have any other comment to that area there in terms of coalition structure.
Right. So I did speak with Angela Carmen, the city attorney, and she did confirm that the working groups as originally outlined in the resolution did in fact have to remain, but that we were free to develop additional groups, working groups, if we wanted to. So it's really, you know, how do we want to move forward with when the existing groups can start to reassemble, but also is there a desire for some other specific kinds of groups? And I can actually see this kind of complementing the work of creating the plan, depending on what these other groups are. And they could be some that are ad hoc just for the period of creating the plan and launching it. And then maybe coming back and asking from a long-term perspective, are these additional ad hoc groups something we want to make permanent, or they served a purpose in terms of creating the plan? But she did confirm that the three existing working groups we have did have to remain. And I can let everybody know what group you had signed up for previously, since it's been a little while since we've met in the groups. So I can get that out to everyone. I'll do one email and I'll just have all of the groups listed. Because some of you, might want to work on two groups, so I'll list them all in one email so we can have that handy. But then the other part now is, when do we want to schedule for those groups to meet? Because if you recall, we were doing every other month, full coalition 1 month, working groups the next. So, I think that's going to be the question now, is the frequency at which you'd like the working groups to work, and how will that impact the full committee meetings?
I would throw out there in that framing to the group, I guess, in terms of with our meeting on the 17th, that maybe in our debriefing, in terms of once we've finished that meeting or come to the end of that, really maybe then framing out how that conversation, that work then fits into those groups, and then from there, or is there something missing based upon what we discussed? Is there something missing there that we need to create another space for discussion to happen in, and then set that schedule from there? Because again, we'd have really, there's a kind of overarching line on what the committee is, but from that meeting, we'd actually kind of have more of an objective and agenda for where we need to be going and what kind of work needs to happen.
Okay.
Does that sound like a workable plan for a group in terms of how we can move forward from there on the work groups?
Mm-hmm.
Darren, I wanted to go back to something George said earlier, and that is defining affordable housing. I know one of the groups, I don't know if it was one of the working groups or the whole group that was having that discussion early on about defining affordable housing. I know there are other housing groups out here that are struggling with that same thing about defining affordable housing. But as these other groups come up with definitions, it seems to me that we want to make sure that there is a common definition that we all can agree on. And so we really need to bring some of these other groups together, I believe, whether it's in, part of this coalition or what, but just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and I think that as we get there in terms of some of these ad hoc groups and committees, and even the fact, Marlon, I don't, and you can check see, but I don't think there's any. Is there any issue on having that, inviting those other folks to participate in some of these meetings and to be present and involved? They don't necessarily have to be a coalition member to participate in the conversation themselves, and so being able to pull folks in so that we can make sure that we are hearing from those other groups.
Yeah, that's totally possible. And so I think it will just be a matter of the timing. You know? Mm-hmm. because my thinking is, and I appreciate you mentioning about doing a debrief after the September 17th meeting to look at the groups and some of the other stuff, and basically how do we start to put together the framework and who all needs to be at the table to kind of help inform that. So I see us starting that direct outreach to bring folks to the table pretty soon after. I am sensitive to Paul's comment about having the proper staffing or consulting support in place, because somebody will really have to manage all of the processes. And so, that will be a huge part that we'll need to make sure we are able to meet before we start inviting the public to the table.
Do you have any sense on that, on a potential sense on when we could think of having any or getting any additional support on that end?
So, two things. One, I am hoping, this is August, that maybe sometime in the early fall, say maybe October, November, early November, we would have another person on our staff to kind of fill the role that April did. As far as consultants, I'm guessing that we're still going to be looking at probably November, because we'll have to figure out, how much it's likely to cost us. Are we doing one consultant or a team of consultants? So I think that after we do the September 17th meeting, I think that's when we have to kind of make some hard decisions about, okay, what is the kind of consulting support we need? Where that is their focus and their focus only, because like everybody said, they're very busy, right? So who would actually facilitate it? So we have to make sure that we have that person on board. So I would even say, again, a November kind of timeline, because we need to figure out how we're going to pay for it and actually assemble the resources, and then probably put out an RFP or something like that for the consultant. So I'm kind of guesstimating November.
I don't think I'm pulling us off topic, but it's just a question that you prompted, Marla, with the cost component. Are there rescue plan dollars, do you think, that would be available to pay for it?
Possibly. We're kind of working on, what is eligible.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little hesitant on the rescue plan dollars, especially because a lot of it is designed to help fill gaps and bring businesses and other folks back to level ground, or, help some of those businesses and nonprofits and the like that serve the communities that have been, deeply impacted by the virus. So I'm a little reticent about the ARPA funds. I know council is looking right now at how they want to deploy them. That's something that I can ask be looked at in terms of eligibility, but my initial gut reaction is it might not be eligible, but I can look into it.
Yeah, and the reason I ask is, as you know, with the rental assistance stuff, the people who qualified, or the perception of people who qualified, kept getting broader and broader as they were realizing that the dollars weren't getting where they wanted them to go. And I think, they started really getting, loose is the wrong word. They just broadened the pool of people who were quote unquote affected by COVID, how their housing was affected by COVID. And I'm kind of wondering if the same thing is going to happen for all the cities that are dealing with this. I mean, if you think about it, there were people who were behind on rent before COVID. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean that that COVID didn't affect them, so they were able to get some assistance, even though they might have had rental problems before, before COVID actually took effect. So, I mean, I know the dollars didn't exactly translate to those earlier months, but still they kept getting broader and broader. And what I'm hoping is for the city's purposes, the same thing happens with the rescue plan funds. You know, we had an affordable housing problem before COVID. COVID most certainly made it worse. And
Right.
so, you know, I would hope that we could find some dollars that, you know, that they would say, yes, it qualifies, and getting that consultant in, even though it's being paid for with COVID dollars, it's going to help solve our overall problem.
Right, right. And right now, and you all may have seen it in the media, some of what council is looking at is the potential of dedicating some portion of the ARPA funds to housing in the second tranche of funding. I'm guessing that by and large, the idea is it would be, you know, be cap, hard cost, those kinds of things. But a lot of the conversation has been around roughly 20 million for housing. So to really try to participate in helping more units come out the ground.
Yeah.
So I'll definitely check. You know, because some discussion around, you know, the state of housing and the need for a housing plan kind of was lifted up to some extent in the For Everyone Home report. You know, there were some dollars that were to support that work, which could potentially help. And, you know, one of the things in looking at how we pay for it, I think it would be good if we were able to kind of have a pool of funds where different folks contributed. You know, I think that will help also send the message that it is a collaborative effort and it's not just the city's plan, it's the community's plan. And so maybe having that opportunity for philanthropy and others to actually support it, I think, you know, helps reinforce that idea that it's the community's plan, not the city. And that's a huge, that is of great importance to me, that this isn't just seen as the city's plan, because there are various pieces of this work that are going to have to be led by and owned by others than just the city. And I may have mentioned before, and I think Andronika Morris mentioned when she was on the call with us a few months ago, you know, New Orleans has an annual report card. And so they look at what all of the commitments were from the various partners who helped put that together. And then they do this annual report card to tell you, well, did you do what you said you were going to do? And when I spoke with her last month, she said, she said the mayor was going to be upset with them because the report cards had just come out and they had rated the city as a C-. Right? So it's like, we're going to hold you accountable, city government, and you in the development community, or you in the financial community, whatever the case may be. And I appreciated that, because then that said, this is a collective, right? And so I just want to really have us be in a place where the expectation is not that the city is the be all and the sole supporter of this work, because it's going to take us representing different facets of the community to make it happen.
I've got to go in a couple minutes, but I think that's a great point, Marla, about having more than just the city contribute to not just the actual projects itself, but the creation of the plan. I do think maybe that opens up the door not just to private sector participation in the funds needed for a plan, but maybe some of our community foundations could be approached with that. I think the idea of having a 10-year plan to deal with affordable housing might be something that could be attractive to them. So that might be an opening there. And then going back to kind of what you were saying about maybe the second tranche of rescue plan money coming to this, that the council wants to think about that for housing. if in fact you find that that money can be used for putting together the plan for affordable housing, it seems to me that'd be an ideal thing for the first tranche to get ready to spend money out of the second tranche to do that. I mean, that would provide some direct linkage in why we're spending the money from that in order to kind of direct the funds to affordable housing in the second tranche there. But I really like the idea about making this more than just what the city can put into it. And I'm sorry, but I'm at the point where I'm going to have to jump off. But thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Paul, for your comments. We'll be in touch. Take care.
Yeah. And Marla, I agree with all that, everybody, in terms of just make sure other folks are at the table, and I guess and figuring out that plan forward. I know I've heard some of the council members talk about how to put that additional money out there as the carrot to try to pull other folks in to support it. But I also operate with a high level of urgency in the sense of it, in terms of, well, we want to pull them in, but being able to walk and chew gum at the same time, working to pull folks in, but not waiting on them at the same time to come in, wanting to build it. But also, for some, it is also, I need to see it. So, show me something that you're doing at the same time. And then that also helps pull people in at the same time. So just wondering how we look at that, and then looking at the city and potential things. Because if it's not ARPA dollars, then, I'd also wonder in terms of the last bond referendum that has housing dollars associated to it, whether or not there are additional resources there that could be tapped to just be some of the seed kickoff dollars, and even some of the CDBG funds and others that are coming in to have a bit of broader opportunity to be used in the same fashion. Again, just around not huge initial large commitments, but at least to say, hey, if we need this staff person, we need these people, being able to allocate some resources to make sure we can start building that ship while we're trying to get other people at the table.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's going to be like being on parallel tracks, right? We got to get it started, look for some of that seed to just get started while we try to cultivate some of the other resources that'll help us get over the hump. Because, we'll get to the point where we'll have to look at who's going to actually be the quarterback to implement the plan, right? And it does not, nor should it, I think, rest with the city, even in that respect. So what is the capacity that we may need to build as a community to have somebody who's got this under their umbrella to kind of manage and make sure that people are actually stepping into the role that they agreed to do. Right, which is why those report cards came in so handy. Okay, city, you got a C-. Okay, what did the city not do that it had pledged to do? And so you'll need somebody who can do that. That whole accountability piece, the transparency and reporting. That needs to reside somewhere, and I don't think it's the city. It's certainly. I know we have struggles with capacity in the community. So, I think as a part of this work is, what are our capacity deficits and gaps, and how do we fill them? Could it be a situation where maybe something just starts with the city with the idea that we hand it off to somebody when we get to a certain point? I don't know. I don't know. And I'm a little reticent to say, we could try it because we've got so much coming. If they do, if the council does agree to put a significant chunk of ARPA money into housing, we're going to be really busy as a department. And there's other money we know coming through HUD, an increase in home funds. So, I'm a little reticent to say we could try it. Like I said, maybe we could spin it out, but to carry it, no.
Yeah, and I guess then just for me, I guess it's I struggle in the sense of this place of city not necessarily being the one to necessarily maybe carry that work, but then also in the sense of whoever does do it needs to have influence and needs to be able to have the ability to help make things happen in that process. And so if it is another space, if we're thinking of it in that way, we got to think on the front end, how does that entity, that group, that person, that thing have that ability to actually have that influence and have that impact. And often, even from the foundational standpoints where we see, how foundations try to shift and change on what they wanted as outcomes from agencies, it was all around the money. So if you were able to control the money, you were able to control what people did and how they executed on what you wanted them to do. And notwithstanding that, it's hard for me to see how you help facilitate the outcomes. And I'm sure there's other places on how they do that. And that may be one of the things underneath it can help me get a better sense of. But that's one of the things for me I struggle with is without having that impact on that, how do you help people actually do what you want them to do if you're not financially in the game with them?
Yeah, and that is one of the interesting things about Housing DOLA, because they've raised money to support their work. They're a nonprofit, and they are in a space, and I'd like to think this isn't unique to New Orleans, but they're in a space where they can interface with everybody just because of the way the housing environment is working there. So they can run with the big boys, but they're also able to call out the big boys. And they might be a little flack, but at the end of the day, everybody is still around that table committed to the same goals and outcomes, right? However this ends up getting structured, that person, entity, whomever, has to be able to call a spade, as we've said, they'll just have to be able to call out folks, hold people accountable, really, I think is the thing, and have those relationships and part of networks where they can fundraise to keep the work going and that kind of thing. But yeah, she'll be able to speak at length on that.
Got it.
Okay. I'm just looking at the agenda. Yeah. Okay.
Ryan, were you getting ready to say that? I thought you came off mute there.
No, I agreed with where you were going. I was going to go to the same place. I mean, to me, it's a little bit of a chicken or the egg thing. We need the capacity or somebody in the community to take it on. I think especially before we start going out either for philanthropic or investment dollars, because people are going to want to know who's managing it, right? And even if the ask is coming from somebody that doesn't have maybe the profile that you're talking about, just knowing who it is will go a long way, and maybe who's behind them, be it the city, foundations, this group, whatever. But that ask, without knowing who ultimately is going to be running it, is going to be really hard to move forward.
And what's interesting, I like, the whole dilemma about the chicken and the egg, because it could be that in the process of creating the plan, we come to see who could possibly do it, right? Because I think when they started in New Orleans, there wasn't this really clear path that this whole new organization was going to get created. But they knew that they had a lot of folk in the nonprofit sector who played a role and who agreed to be at the table. And so, just thinking about that, which is why I said, might there be a need for some of it to start in the city, but with a clear goal that by a certain point in time, it spins out of the city into the community, just to get it going while we try to build the capacity if we don't find it. So it really is, we really are between a rock and a hard place in some respects, trying to get there. But, we can continue to talk it through, but it may be that we have an interim plan and then the actual long-term plan where it resides in community.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. And I think even if you look at how the creation of halls in Winston. So, Housing Authority of Winston-Salem, most people think it's an entity of the city, but it's its own individual organization. But there is a city connection in the sense of its actual creation did derive from the city of Winston-Salem, but it was created to stand on its own as its own organization and agency to provide those services. So I get you.
Yeah. That was a great example. Yeah. Okay.
Cool. All right. That's the end of, looks like that was the last thing on the agenda for us. Other folks have other items or things to bring to the group. Okay. If not, then if you have thoughts or framework on for the framework for our conversation on the 17th, get that over to Marla by the 10th so she can make sure that Andronika can get that information and kind of meditate on that prior to her coming in. We'll also get information on actual location wise when we set on that in advance of the meeting. And remember that 17th, it'll be 11 on the 17th.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you all very much. And I'll leave it to you, sir, to close us out.
All right. If that's it, nothing else, then we'll consider ourselves adjourned until 17.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Take care.